So I've been a councillor for about 15 years in Kirklees, and the great thing about doing a presentation like this in the north as opposed to London is people don't ask you where in Scotland is Kirklees, which is a bit of a problem. So I've been a councillor for quite a while. One of the things that, one of the duties I've taken on recently is I'm now a member of something called the Committee of the Regions. And it's an EU committee, and it represents local and devolved administrations at the European level. So we give an input into European policy from a local perspective. And I was nominated by the Local Government Association Independent Green, which represents independents, Greens, and UKIP. On the Local Government Association. So I am Nigel Farage's man in Brussels on local government. I don't know if he knows much about that. If he did, he'd be not very happy, I'm sure. So one of the issues that obviously is very high on people's minds at the moment is the Paris talks, the COP21 talks about climate change. And I'd just like to quickly read this letter to you, which is a genuine, honest, it's a genuine letter from 10 Downing Street to me. And you know it's genuine because there's a logo from 10 Downing Street on here, and it's very difficult to rip a logo off the internet and put it in a letter, as I did the other day. Anyway, it says here, Dear Andrew, COP21 talks Paris, November, December 2015. We're in a real fix and we need your help urgently as a leader of one of the political groups on Kirklees Council. The targets we and other governments have put forward for the COP21 talks on climate change simply don't cut the mustard. In a nutshell, the savings we have identified still mean an increase in global temperatures of 2.7 degrees. That is simply not enough to prevent runaway climate change. Let's face it, Andrew, local councils have the contacts, the knowledge and experience on the ground to deliver a massive energy efficiency and renewables programme that will more than provide the savings we need. So we need your plans, your expertise and your knowledge to get us back on track. We're not daft enough to believe that market forces are going to save us. It's genuinely. It is not just your plans we want, but your opinions and views on what government can do to help you realise your plans. And also let us know where we're getting it wrong. Wow. Local governments and national governments are partners, after all. If you can get back to me this week with your thoughts, that will be excellent. We're sending our Minister, Amber Rudd, to Paris in a couple of weeks, and she needs all the help she can get. After all, what does the former aristocracy consultant on 4 weddings and a funeral know about climate change? Anyway. P.S. Sorry about the fracking, Hinkley C, abolishing zero carbon homes, making the feed-in tariffs ineffective, etc., etc. We were having a bad day. There we go. That's. It's not a genuine letter. I know it's going to come as a bit of a shock to you. And the issue, of course, is that no local councils, no local councillors, no local council leaders around the country were contacted by the government saying, what can we do to help address climate change? What are the things that we ought to be doing? We need your help. We're the people, we are the people on the ground. We are the people who can do things. We have delivered massive energy efficiency programs in different councils across the country. And so the question is, if government was really taking the issue of climate change seriously, we would be top of their list as people who they wanted to talk to. And I raised this issue with the Climate Change Commissioner for the EU, Miguel Cañete. My pronunciation of it is getting better of different languages. And I said to Mr. Cañete, can you write to our governments, to our ministers, and say to them that they need to be getting in touch with us because they're simply not doing that? And he said he couldn't interfere with the activities of national governments, which was unfortunate. So we come through councils and what we can do, I think we can do an awful lot, but we're not necessarily being used. I'll just mention a few things before I go onto Passivhaus. Let's see. Nope, that doesn't work. That works. Okay, just a bit about us. There are 7 councillors on Kirklees Council in our group. We share a group with 3 Valley Independents, so there are 4 Greens and 3 Valley Independents. And Kirklees Council has been hung since 1999. We have had Lib Dem Green administrations, we've had Conservative administrations, which for a short amount of time was supported by the Greens, not supported, allowed them to get budgets passed. That's a story. It's quite a complicated story. For people who know about these things, Kirklees is a winner of the Ashton Award, which is a quite prestigious award for sustainable energy, and a lot of that's actually based on Green Party policies. And we had the first ever completely free insulation scheme in the UK, and this was the criteria for this was basically if you were breathing and lived in a house, it got insulated. That was pretty much how it worked. And this was in 2007, and 2007 was the year that the Conservatives had the largest minority administration, and of course that put us in a bit of a difficult position. And the Conservative leader was coming up and being quite nice to me, which made me feel uncomfortable. So we had a bit of a chat and said, well, these are the Conservatives, so the price for doing a deal with the Conservatives is a lot more than it would be for anybody else, because they're the Tories, and say if they want to do something, we'll have to go up with some really good stuff. So we said, right, okay, what shall we ask for? Well, we want a free insulation scheme for the whole, everybody should be able to get it. It'll cost £21 million. So we want £21 million for this free insulation scheme that everybody gets. So we want that. We'd want a scheme whereby, they won't go for that. We want a scheme where everybody can get solar panels on their home, and they'll pay through it for the charge on the property when they sell their house. No upfront payments. So basically, when you sell your house, you do it. So if you stay in your house and you don't move, your solar panels get paid for when you eventually die, perhaps. It was the sort of pay when you die scheme, as I called it, which is great because I'd like to pay for everything. So we had that scheme, and they said that they'll never agree to that. It's going to cost £5 million. And remember, this is in the days of plenty, before the advent of austerity politics. And so they went for that, and a whole number of other things as well. We got the most amazing school in the News Award, which I represent. It is just absolutely amazing. It's like a cathedral, sustainable energy cathedral of a school, and no school will be built like that again. So there's a whole lot of things that we got, and then we had this rider when we were doing the deal, which we said to ourselves: the moment these people start acting like Tories, we will have a deal with the Lib Dems and Labour, and we'll kick him out. And that's what we did. Not before we got everything we wanted. So there we go. So we've had there's a lot of things we can do. There's a large story about all that, which I could spend ages talking. Do you want to quickly talk about fracking? I know you've got your local plan. Your local plan's currently out at the moment, is it? For consultation.
Is it John?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, we're putting in something which is saying that all companies submitting applications for shale gas extraction will need to demonstrate how their operations will have no net detrimental impact on climate change. We can't ban them from doing fracking, but we want them to prove to us how they're going to do it, because we don't think they can, but we'd like them to go through that process. I reckon it's that down, isn't it? Something else we're doing at the moment, right now, is, and it's going to be proved difficult surely, is we have a £9.2 million scheme putting solar PV on council houses. And we had this principle when we were putting forward our ideas that we would, for budgets, that we wouldn't swap social services for solar panels. It was a bit of a mantra with us. We didn't want to be those sort of green politicians who were saying, oh yeah, we're environmental greenies, and therefore we care more about solar panels than we do about people's care. So we made sure we didn't do that. But what we could do, the housing revenue account is about council housing, and all the money for that is ring-fenced. And so it can't be used for any other purposes than council housing. So they had a huge surplus on the housing revenue account, which was to pay for boilers, which were 10, 11, 12 years till they were replaced. So I put the argument to them and said, well, if you put solar panels on and you've got this large surplus, with a feed-in tariff, all that money will be back in the housing revenue account from the feed-in tariff in time to pay for those boilers in 10 years. So you'll have solar panels on the house, you'll have tenants with cheaper fuel bills, and you'll still have the money that you had in the first place. And eventually, the Director of Finance got it, and we agreed the programme. So we got that past the Labour group, 2,000 council houses over a 2-year programme. They reckoned a 12-year payback for that, but it's actually, in reality, it's going to be much less than that. So yeah, one of the key things we wanted to do was get energy advice associated with it to maximise the savings. So people were, got timers, so the washing machine was coming on the day. They got into the whole idea about, the sun shining, I can mow the lawn, or whatever. So making sure that they got the maximum advantage out of that. And one of the unfortunate things is there was no installations in the wards that the Greens represented as a result of this. And what they said to me is, Councillor Cooper, over the years, you've had 300 solar PV installations in your area, you can't have any more. So we've got things another way. So we were working with the Labour Party on this, which is pretty good so far. Let's see how it goes. So the benefits of this, Kirklees Building Services, our own direct labour organisation, were the ones who were doing the work, and so they're trained, so it's our own staff who are installing. And they beat British Gas to become PV Installer of the Year, which was almost as good as winning it itself, I thought. And the way we've actually put it forward is that the savings are equivalent to 2 weeks' rent. And if you were to go to council tenants and say to them, we're going to reduce your rent by 2 weeks, they'd be pretty pleased about it, and you wouldn't be able to do it financially. But the same impact we can do with this. And we calculated that about £300,000 a year will go back into the economy. And we're now trying to get building services to install in the private sector. But we've got a problem. There's the bidding of green policies. There's an 87% cut in the feed-in tariff. So we're trying to get as many installs as we can done before the January the 1st. And we reckon we'll get about 600 out of the 2,000 done. We're going to review the policy when we find out what the government's actual policy is, because it's just a consultation at the moment. So we've put our things in. One of the interesting things is the Solar Trade Association produced something called a Solar Independence Plan, showing how they'd be free of any support by 2020. And one of the points I've made is that it's interesting that there is no other energy. I've never seen a nuclear independence plan showing they're going to be free of any support. Right, let's get on to passive houses and zero carbon homes and all that sort of stuff. So zero carbon homes was the policy which was due to be introduced next year. It wasn't a perfect policy, but it was 9 years in development. And the industry had spent millions developing new approaches to building regulations. They've been seriously working on it. The whole idea was originally established by the Labour government, and at the time I was saying, well, hang on a minute, we've got lots of old properties that we need to do up here. There's a lot of work that needs doing. But it was an interesting and ambitious policy. And it was by no means perfect. It was dependent on on-site renewables, so it wasn't so much looking at reducing demand for energy, but accommodating it and finding ways of doing that using solar panels, all good stuff, but the philosophy wasn't quite right. And they were also looking at things like offsetting the carbon savings. So it might have been by buying carbon savings from planting trees or some development elsewhere. So the policy was by no means perfect, but despite that, it would have been a certain amount of progress. But the government went and dumped it, like a whole load of other policies. So let's talk about a bit about Passivhaus. What is Passivhaus? It's a different philosophy. It's all about very much about reducing demand for energy, making sure that it's not, you don't actually need a huge amount of heating within homes. Super insulation, thermal bridge-free design, so heat doesn't cross across cavities or through windows or whatever. And it has heat recovery ventilation. You've got airtight buildings, but you've got heat recovery ventilation that's recovering heat and putting it back into the home. And energy demand is 90% less, give or take. And that means that roughly, as a rough and ready figure, you would be having energy bills of less than £100 a year per household. And if you think about your own energy bills and how much you spend on those, it's going to be a little bit more than £100 a year. So mine certainly is. And I've got all sorts of solar panels and things. So why do we need a Passivhaus policy? Well, of course, I talked about COP21 earlier on. And of course, we need to make sure that if we're going to build houses which are going to be around for 30, 40, 50, 100 years in the future, that the carbon emissions that they give off are going to be as limited as they possibly can be. And so it's just the right thing to do from where we are at the moment. And certainly in the context of the emissions we've got to save. One of the things that's often forgotten about this is it puts more money back into the local economy. We're currently consulting on our local planning Kirklees, and they're looking at building 29,000 houses between now and 2031. And say that the energy demand for those houses was going to be about £1,000 per house, and there's 29,000 houses. Well, that's £29 million at today's prices that will be being paid to energy companies for the privilege of burning gas and electricity in those homes. And so if you actually reduce that demand significantly, that means there will be somewhere in the region of £28 million a year, which will not be going to those hard-pressed energy companies, and will be instead will generally be hopefully be spent within the local economy or to Amazon. But it will mean that people will have more money in their pockets, and that money will have the opportunity to be spent in the local economy. Addressing poverty is really important. We're going to be building social housing, and we're going to be building social housing. Certainly, our council is looking at doing that. And if you're saying to people, out of your benefits and your living income, out of your working family's tax credit, if you're going to be lucky enough to have it over the next year or two, then you've got to find, who knows, £1,000 more, whatever it happens to be, to actually pay for your gas and electricity bill. This helps people on low incomes, and I think anybody living in social housing really ought to have the opportunity to live in a Passivhaus. I think we need it because government has abandoned the zero carbon homes policy. I looked at what they did, and I thought this is a huge opportunity actually, because we were going to be hidebound by the zero carbon homes policy. If we have the Passivhaus policy, that is an international system. That's an international standard. And the great thing about international standards, as opposed to national standards, is the government can't muck about with them. Because that's where they are. So long as they comply with building regulations, which they will do, that's fine. But if it's an international standard, and that's what you adopt, and a council adopts, well, that's good. We don't need to worry too much about them making a complete mess of it, like they've done with building regulations. So Passivhaus in Kirklees. What happened was, I mentioned the school that we had built. It was two schools that came together, and so there was an old primary school site which was surplus to requirements. And so about nearly a year ago, the site came before the Kirklees Cabinet, and we were saying, right, we've got some disposals to do, and yours truly turned to the Cabinet meeting, and I said, actually, I would like a condition placed on this site that if as you're going to flog it, to goodness knows who, I want a condition on it that they can only build build Passivhaus standards. And there's all this muttering between the council. It's him again. Yeah. What's he said this time? Yeah. And they said, right, okay, we'll take it out. We'll take it out of the report, and we'll sit down and have a chat about it. And so we did. We sat down and had a chat about it. And we agreed that yes, it could be a Passivhaus development, and indeed, if we were to put a budget amendment forward using the housing revenue account, because it was going to be social housing, they would put £1.1 million aside to support taking it up to Passivhaus standards. So, and that was for an exemplar development of 30 to 40 properties. So we got that. That's in the bag. It's part of the budget. It's part of what we're doing. And I thought, yeah, great. Here we go. We're going to have an absolutely great development in our area. It's going to be social housing. It's great. And immediately my thought was, looking back at the last 15 years as a councillor, and there's lots of things we can point at and go, yeah, that's great. And we did that. But it's just another pilot project. It's not changed the world. It is not actually, it's not a policy which has done anything other than said, this is what the world could be like if we had all the right policies. So let's actually see what we can do above and beyond that. So this is the policy I've been pushing. This council specifies that Passivhaus standards on all buildings on council land, and as a condition of sale on council land, on any council land. And the idea was really is that I got this thing in my head, because I was thinking, if I just say there's a standard on council-owned land, they'll do something devious and sell it to a housing association and build it to standard building regulations. It's almost as if I didn't trust them. And I didn't. And so that's the policy that we're trying to get passed. Let's not get our households. That is not Kirklees Council policy. That's what I'm pushing at every possible opportunity and at every possible meeting is to achieve that aim. So that's what we want, but not where we are at the moment. And that, of course, is what we're trying to push through the Passivhaus campaign that you're doing here, which we'll hear a bit more about later. So one of the problems I've had with a particular Labour councillor in Kirklees, who is of the old school, the old Labour school variety, which has its pros and it has its cons. And he's saying, well, Councillor Cooper, if we build to Passivhaus standards, that's going to mean that we won't be able to build as many houses. We won't be able to build as many houses because we're spending all this money on building your Passivhouses, and therefore we'll have instead of having 100 houses, we'll have 90 houses. So the question was, do Passivhouses cost too much? And because I'm a politician, the answer is, well, the first one is yes and no, is the answer to that. And I think the answer is really that yes, they can cost more, and actually no, they might not. And I'll explain a bit about that. The study's being done into costs of Passivhaus and of developments. It's found that costs can vary between 0 and 30%. Additional cost but the average is usually about 10%. So yes, there can be additional cost, and I think we've got to look into the reasons why that might be. So there's additional cost, and we're building social housing. Say we are actually reducing somebody's potential fuel bill by about £1,000 a year. What you could do is you could increase the rent on that, not to cover the whole £1,000, but to cover a proportion of it, which can then be recovered to help cover the costs, the additional cost of the development. The householder is still saving hundreds of pounds a year in terms of energy bills. They're still doing that, and you'll get more money back to actually pay for the development. So you take a whole life cost approach, whereby you don't just look at the capital cost, but you look at the revenue that you can recover from a development like this. So the additional cost of Passive House could be accommodated in social housing developments. No reason why it can't. There's another reason why Passive House might cost too much, and that's because it's not that common. It's quite new. It's not right the way through the industry. There are specialist contractors who are used to it, who understand it, and because it's not all out there, we need to find ways of actually encouraging it. So policies like this will actually help make Passive House cheaper, because it gives a market for this sort of work. There are examples of Passive House developments where there have been no additional costs beyond standard buildings. And there's two schools in Wolverhampton where a company which understands Passive House design, archetype design, has built those to those with no additional cost. So it is possible, but it's about knowledge, understanding, and having developers who au fait with Passive House technology. Another thing we've looked at in Kirklees is to say, well, why don't we have a competition for developers and say we have got these areas of land that we're wanting to develop on. Now, our aim as a council is to have a policy where Passive House developments cost no more than standard building regulations. So what we want is, we've got these bits of land, and we'll put up a competition and see who can come up with a price for this development which can deliver that. And so we put the challenge out to the industry. And what you'd imagine is that the industry would then go out and seek out people in the Passive House industry to do partnerships with them to try and deliver that. So that's another thing we're looking at. Another way of addressing costs is we're talking about a 2 to 3 year run-in for this policy. So we're not going to say, right, we passed the policy, right, everybody just Passive House. We're saying we're passing the policy and it will come in 2 or 3 years. So we've given notice to the industry that is what we're going to be doing, which allows them time to scale up. It allows them time to work with others and to recognise that that's going to go on. It also enables us to get some exemplar developments which they can learn from as well. Flat pack Passive House developments. There are companies now, certainly one in Sheffield called C2, CITU, who are developing a lot of the components, walls, whole walls, and windows and bin walls off-site, and taking them to Passive House developments where they're then assembling them quite quickly. And that obviously cuts down costs an awful lot if you haven't got a guy sticking a brick on top of each other for however long that takes. And so that is another area where costs can be cut. I think the real opportunity here, and the thing I'm trying to push with Kirklees, is that we want to become a hub for Passive House design and construction, and linking with local colleges who do building work is one of the things which can give us that sort of opportunity. So I look at the question from the Labour cabinet member, don't Passive House developments cost too much? I think, well, actually, there's things that we can do, the policy that we would apply would be such that we can handle those costs, we can deal with them, and we can actually help bring them down. That's part of our role. We don't just passively sit there. We don't just passively sit there and just accept the costs. We do what we can as a responsible council to bring those costs down. So, what do passive homes look like? That's a sort of question that I had from various people. That's a passive house. And there's a sort of straightforward answer to that question, which is I think you could walk down the street of newly built houses, and you could walk past them and you wouldn't know, if you were trained, whether it was a passive house or not. Because it's not about fancy solar panels, it's not about necessarily the heating or whatever kit that's in the home. It's about the insulation of the property, it's about the walls, it's about the air tightness. So you can wander down the street like this, forget the solar panels, the solar thermal panels, and you would that either could or could not be a passive house. So it's not about a look, because they can look lots of different ways. Whoa. Here's a passive house in Oldham that was constructed, and this is social housing with two done next to each other, and they've done studies of the costs here for the households there, and yes, they've got heating bills of less than £100 a year around that sort of area, so it works. This one's in Denby Dale, near Huddersfield, and yes, it's got the solar PV panels on the roof. Yes, it's got solar thermal panels on the roof. Yes, it's got this great glassed area and everything, and it looks a bit wacky from as opposed to a normal house. But really, that glazed area was something that the client wanted when the house was built. You could just forget that, and it looked like a sort of standard house. It doesn't have to have the solar panels, and that would be, you sort of walk down the street and go, but it would have 90% less energy demand than a standard property. And one of the problems that they've had is that it can get really hot in there because of the huge glazed area. So they've now got these louvered that they can tilt shutters, which look great actually. It just means that they can stay cool. And I think the best advocates, this is the Mr. and Mrs. Tunstall in their house, and one of the best advocates for passive houses are the people who actually live in them. And they've now lived there for 5 years. I went in 5 years ago while it was being constructed, and with the builders from the Green Building Store, and they love their home, and they're just incredibly enthusiastic about it, and find it so good for their health. And I met Jeff on the train about 3 or 4 months ago, and I said, "How's it going? How's it all panning out?" And they said, "Well, I've done the calculations, and with the solar panels and everything, I reckon I'm £32 up this year. Which £32 up this year. So, that's a house which generally makes a positive contribution to climate change and everything." So there we are. That's that. This was actually taken from the filming of the One Show. I appeared on the One Show about 6 months ago. 6 weeks, 2 months ago. And this was about the dumping of green policies. And so when they were talking about the dumping of green policies and zero carbon homes, it was Green Party policy on passive homes which was put forward as the alternative, as the thing that we wanted to see. So we have a huge opportunity here. And yes, government has made a bit of a mess of the zero carbon homes policy, but we can think imaginatively about local solutions. My dream for this is to have local councils actually holding a mirror of the government and saying, "You've denied a good future for new buildings, for our communities. Here's what we've done at the local level, and we've made it work. We didn't need national government to do it. We made it work in our own area, and we've passed that." So there you go. That's my contact details. Any questions?
Well, should we come for questions afterwards, if
Sure.
that's okay? And
Sure.
we'll just thank Andrew for now.